Vision, seeing with our eyes the people and the things around us, our reality. In a mirror, seeing ourselves and where we have come from, our past. Through the Hubble telescope, seeing 12 billion light years away, unimaginable. For the vision impaired, seeing through our other senses. Vision, an ability or imagination to think about or plan the future for the way things might be. Before we discuss Vision 2020 with our lineup of respected and highly motivated guest pharmacists, let's take a moment to explain FIP and the community pharmacy section. FIP, through associations and individual pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists, and representing 3 million practitioners, brings together people committed to improving global health. One of the several interest groups and sections of FIP is the Community Pharmacy Section, CPS. The section seeks to be another touch point for community pharmacists to help them in the delivery of medicines, health products, and services that will improve medicine use and advance patient care. One recent project developed by the section has been Vision 2020, led by Emma Polino of Portugal, a look into the near future of and to highlight the key components in community pharmacy practice. In this video, 10 internationally recognized pharmacists will speak to each of these key components. At the end of the video, we will post a web link to the references and resources associated with each topic as provided by our guests. The Community Pharmacy section sincerely thanks our guests for sharing their time, knowledge, and opinions on the CPS Vision 2020. My name is Warren Meek, President of C7 Consulting, and I am pleased to be the narrator for this video. Our next guest is Greg Eberhart from Canada. Greg will be talking with us today about legislative framework and regulation. Greg, can you give us a high-level overview of the importance of appropriate legislative framework and regulation as it applies to community pharmacy?
I think it's important for us to understand why legislation and regulation exists. And legislation at the highest level is obviously owned by government, and we're very privileged as professionals to have been delegated the privilege of self-regulating our profession. I think it's important for we as professionals and we as a profession to understand some of the challenges that governments face, whether it be in the Western world or whether it be in the developing world. And I think that a cornerstone is safety. But I think emerging very, very rapidly is the thought around quality, with safety just being a subcomponent of quality. And to that extent, the challenges that governments are facing are what do we do to create systems, and in our case use pharmacists, to ensure that our citizens have access to the care that they need, that when they do access care, that it is of high quality, and within that anticipate safety, and through a combination of each of those contributes to a sustainable system that can really meet the needs of the population. At the individual level and at the professional level, I would suggest that cornerstones to the success of community pharmacy and pharmacists in general is a real commitment to professionalism, a real commitment to our code of ethics, and a real commitment to the individuals we serve. I think that if there's any threat to community pharmacy, it's the inconsistency in the experiences that individuals have as they acquaint pharmacists and pharmacies across the community. So as we come back to the legislative framework and we take those considerations or keep those considerations in mind, I think that the legislative framework really does two things. On one hand, it endeavors to enable the use of these skills and the competencies of pharmacists. And secondly, balanced with that is a goal to develop the accountabilities that are necessary around those roles and services that pharmacists are going to provide.
Greg, what do you see as some of the key community pharmacy issues that are enabled by appropriate legislation or legislative framework?
I think the legislative framework really does two things. It brings forward the knowledge, skills, and generally the competencies that pharmacists have, and through that establishes roles that they can take on. As an example, in Canada, pharmacists have been historically associated with compounding, dispensing, and selling drugs. And we know that since 2007, we've been very fortunate through the evolution of new scopes of practice for pharmacists, where pharmacists are now able to prescribe drugs and pharmacists are able to administer drugs by injection. The advent of these two new roles are initiatives by government to provide improved access to patients, to provide tools that pharmacists can respond to the needs of patients more immediately as compared to having to refer them back into other parts of the system.
Thanks, Greg. Are there any particular community pharmacy issues that are being hindered by any current legislation or legislative framework that are really an area where we would like to see some changes made?
Well, your last words are key to the question, and really it is, what is it that we would like to see? I think it's really important that we keep our eye on the future and to understand that whatever we create in legislation has consequences, both pro and con. And I think there's probably some discussions that pharmacists need to have within their organizations and across the profession to anticipate what is prudent for the future. For example, we have experienced in our environment some very innovative applications. It used to be that a pharmacy was a pharmacy was a pharmacy. Now we see entities looking for a pharmacy license where they're only interested in addressing a very niche component of the individual's overall care. We're seeing some initiatives by manufacturers where they're looking at restricting the availability of their product to certain outlets. We now see the use of teletechnology to facilitate the delivery of services across jurisdictional borders. And while on one hand we might have the discussion about how we license pharmacies and how and whether we facilitate the distribution of products and services across provincial borders, there are yet other considerations that need to be taken into account when we look at the knowledge of pharmacists transcending provincial and jurisdictional borders. So I think that we have a rapidly changing world ahead of us, and it's important to have discussion within the profession because I don't think that we're going to be able to prevent these changes. I think it's important for us to have the debates and the discussions about what changes are in the best interest of the system and the public, and how do we respond to that with the appropriate legislative structures.
Do you have any specific advice, guidance, or direction on how best the average community pharmacist can be an influencer of best legislation?
And again, I share this in the Canadian context. We've seen substantive changes in the demographics of pharmacists, not just from an ethnic perspective, but also from a professional and employment perspective. Often we as organizations are looked upon for representation or to take action on certain issues on behalf of pharmacists. And there is a role for organizations to do that. But the success of organizations, whether they be professional organizations or whether they be the regulatory bodies, can only be as successful as the consistency of the practices and the professionalism demonstrated by the individual members on a day-in, day-out basis across the system. That's what the decision makers relate to, that's what the public relates to, and that's what will really define our future.
Thanks, Greg. Do you have any examples of either legislation or a legislative approach that you feel are good examples for other pharmacists, associations, or countries to model?
I will speak to my experience with legislation in our jurisdiction. And it would have been in 2000 that provincial omnibus legislation was passed that now really spans 29 different health professions. And I think that there is value in having a common umbrella for all of the health professionals, particularly in circumstances where we expect the health professionals to work together in teams. So within that umbrella legislation, there are consistent expectations with respect to governance, registration, resolution of complaints, and it provides a separate subsection to deal with the scopes of practice for each of the 29 professions independently. That common umbrella does facilitate discussion and common approaches to, again, dealing with some of those components that the public is most interested and concerned about. So again, I would be a proponent of umbrella legislation that creates a degree of consistency and common understanding for the publics that we serve, so long as there can be the definition and the clarity around the roles that each one of the professionals provides.
A long question, Greg. What are some of the balancing points between the public, who need protection from harm by the service or products supplied by pharmacists, and the profession that generally wants to expand their service offerings for better patient health outcomes?
Well, I think we come back to principles again, and I think that things the public is really interested in is about access to quality care. And I can't think of anything that's more empowering and important to achieving that than the consistency in practice, where individuals consistently experience through their pharmacist an engagement where appropriate decisions are made about the drug therapy that they require, and that in fact they regularly experience the support and the monitoring that is important to us. I think when individuals experience that, the value proposition for pharmacists increases. If the public and patients don't experience that consistently, the value proposition for pharmacists decreases. And I think it's the value proposition that has an impact on our pride. It certainly has an impact on our succession and our viability to the future. So ultimately, it comes back to what are pharmacists able to do? Are they prepared to deliver upon it? And what is the experience that the patient has, again, on a regular basis? And I would submit that the public's perspective, and through the public, the government's perspective, on the status of any health profession, depends highly on the experience of individuals on a day-to-day basis.
Can you speak to the gains in quality with appropriate pharmacy or pharmaceutical legislation and regulations?
Well, I'll use anticoagulation as an example. And the reason I'm going to use anticoagulation is that it was an area that we piloted and explored as a foundation in promoting a new scope of practice for pharmacists. And we began with a very small demonstration project in one of the hospitals in Edmonton. We trained pharmacists to be part of a multidisciplinary team working with internists and cardiologists, and we empowered those pharmacists to in fact make drug therapy decisions for patients who are using Coumadin. What was significant at the end of that journey was that there was just multiple measurable factors that were all positive. Everything from the satisfaction of the pharmacist, satisfaction of the physicians, satisfaction of patients. We found that there were decreased bleed times. We found that there was decreased hospitalization. There was decreased cost. Everything was positive. And as we moved to the end of the demonstration project, it was able to be expanded where this became a cornerstone within the hospital, a program that was managed and delivered by pharmacists. But it was so successful that they could only manage the most fragile patients and could not accommodate the demand that was there. And that demand has spilled across into the community, where we now have community-based pharmacists who are taking on those roles. So what do we need to do from a systemic perspective? What do we need to do at a professional perspective? Again, to improve the access and to provide a quality experience for the individuals, all relating in a sustainable system, because more people are going to be able to be served for a longer period of time.
Thanks, Greg, for that great discussion. Nice slingshot, Blue Man.